right here in King County, Washington. Thank you all for joining this Congress and Community Roundtable on the humanitarian crisis in Tigray, Ethiopia. The urgency of this crisis and the instability it has caused in the region cannot be overstated. And so we are incredibly grateful to be joined by three esteemed members of Congress, as well as Washington State residents whose lives have been upended by the war in Tigray. Today is a listening session, an opportunity for these constituents who have suffered unbelievable loss to share their stories with their elected representatives. Now, I have heard concerns from some in our community about who was selected and given the opportunity to share their stories at this event. No one was selected. Community board members organized and requested time to share elected representatives. Every resident in our state has a right to request time with their elected officials. And this group of constituents organized and asked for time with their members of Congress. And that's the type of meeting that happens every single day. If you have another aspect of the war, you can decide
we have a special program today.
as my father, my grandmother, and countless family members who lived in Tigray have told me thousands have been displaced from their homes, the region and threatened starvation for millions. You will hear things today during this roundtable that are not ready. So please listen with an open heart. Imagine your loved ones were in the same situation and pray for all those who are suffering through it. With that being said, I will call on our members to introduce themselves, beginning with Congressman Adam Smith.
Thank you, Jeremiah. I appreciate I've had others.
Thank you so much, council members. I knew and with my colleagues in Congress to be here and listen. As many of you know, I started my activist career after September 11th, where we had many of these, we call them Justice for All listening sessions, where we brought people forward to tell their story to members of Congress. I was not a member of Congress at the time, but I want to emphasize the point that you made and that Adam seconded, which is we have had numerous meetings in our office with constituents who have very clear answers on what the solutions are and what the problems are that we welcome those meetings and we're going to have those beyond the listening session. And I think it's very important that the listening session today is focused on the stories and experiences of people who are directly affected, who have family members in the region. And I think the one thing that we are all clear on is that humanitarian crises are difficult situations, but providing humanitarian aid and access for people in the region who have been affected by war is something we all agree on, and we are all working on not only in this region, but in other places around the world. So I'm looking forward to this listening session. I'm looking forward to hearing from people here on Facebook who have differing views. Of course, you know how to reach us. I represent the 7th Congressional District in Congress, which is Seattle, and most of Seattle. Representative Smith has a part of Seattle as well, but also in the surrounding areas. So contact your Congress members. It is what we are supposed to listen to our constituents. So thank you so much, Jeremiah, for having us, and thank you to all of those who are going to today and educate us about what is happening in the region.
Thank you for the invitation to fly, and thank you to members of the community who organized this event and arranged the opportunity for me and my colleagues from Washington State delegation to hear your personal stories. I am a freshman member of Congress, and I've been doing what I can to plane to research this, but we know a few things. There is a humanitarian crisis. It demands our attention, but we know it's complicated. And so I'm just here to listen and to learn and to hear your stories and to think about, what our role could be as the United States. But again, this is about my opportunity to learn, to meet some of you, to hear your stories. And I thank you for the chance to be here today.
Thank you so much, members of Congress, for being here. Next up, I will call on Dunnight to give us an overview and the status of the humanitarian crisis as it stands today.
Thank you, Councilman, for helping us organize and bringing us here today. Hello, Congressman Adam Smith. I am one of your constituents. And hello, Congresswoman Jayapal and Strickland. Honored to be here with two women of color. My name is Danait Tefera. I am a Washington State resident since I was a preteen. I was born in Sudan as a refugee 33 years ago in the same cycle of this war. I'm an international conflict analyst and a racial equity consultant, currently on the occupied land of the Duwamish people. Thank you for being here, despite all of the challenges that you're facing with COVID recovery, as well as the bigger challenge of dismantling our racist system, where we find disproportionately bigger on a global scale and grossly inhumane in every single developing country. No body camps to expose the despicable cruelty against the divine essence of humanity. All over the world, we're failing to protect Black, Brown, and Indigenous people, especially the women. In Tigray, countless youth and children are dying, protecting or trying to protect their elders, their moms, and their sisters. I don't know what just happened. It's disheartening for me to hear the outrage over sexual misconduct that is only reserved for those that have the privilege of protection. When we watch movies about war, we see men killing men, but in real life and in real wars, men kill and rape babies, elders, monks, and nuns. They destroy not only infrastructure like the Takaza Bridge for access points for food and aid, they destroy hospitals and universities to hinder growth and healing. They destroy churches, heritage sites, and landmarks to cleanse our history, our historical settlements of our ancestors. But most horrifically, the strategy of genocidal rape, which is not a byproduct of war, but a deliberate plan and a military strategy to instill terror, humiliation, and displace civilians and decreases the likelihood of return and reconstitution. In Tigray, we're allowing starvation and rape to be used as a tactic of ethnic cleansing and land occupation with a distant concern. We can no longer be bystanders. We have to be active participants in dismantling of racism and toxic male supremacy. We have to stand and speak up for those indigenous peoples everywhere, their right for self-determination, as well as their right to vote and elect their own leaders. Slide, please, Aaron. This dashboard gets updated every day. And I'm gonna leave it there for a minute for you to kind of take it in. And although these numbers have all been reported by credible sources like the UN, UNICEF, UNDP, they're not conclusive due to the lack of the access to the majority of Tigray and also the other regions where there's also lots of loss. 5 million people, over 5 million people have been displaced all over Ethiopia and in desperate need of aid. Over 2 million in famine conditions and close to 70,000 children malnourished. I was born malnourished. It was actually my Korean doctor from Federal Way who looked at my tongue and said that. For sexual violence, we expect more than 10 to 20 more for every single case reported. That is common in war zones. We've seen it in Congo, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, Syria, and Colombia, and many more. And on top of that, there is tens of thousands of prisoners of war that now need food and shelter. Meantime, the federal government of Ethiopia is taking 25% from all salaries in schools from Ethiopia to for the defense force during a unilateral ceasefire, which is very telling of where it's going if we don't act now. The most worrisome for me is the fact that Tigray is not the only conflict zone in Ethiopia. Lives have been lost everywhere on all sides, and violence has been breaking out and escalating over the last 2 years. After the last cycle of war that I was born in, that lasted 17 years, several regional liberation fronts collectively created EPRDF, which was the Ethiopian People Revolutionary Democratic Front, which has been leading Ethiopia for over the last 27 years with exponential growth and prominence in the region and globally, but obviously not perfectly. The new Prosperity Party system is hard to understand since it is yet to be developed and shared. Currently, it seems to be a top-down monarch-type structure where states don't have their regional autonomy. Representatives are appointed from the top down and not from the people, without the 80+ diverse indigenous groups represented, or a means of accountability. Again, thank you for being here, listening to us, and for your time. And next, we will transition to the testimonies of 6 of your constituents who have been directly affected. Ganet, are you ready?
Yes, thank you, Danite. Thank you, Congressmen members. My name is Ganet. I'm gonna give my testimonies of my relatives have been killed. On November 19 and 20 of last year, 5 of my relatives have been killed in Aksum City. My nephews, Farhana and Awalam, they was in Aksum City doing their normal lives until they saw the shooting. The troops was shooting everybody on the street, and they tried to run, save their lives for all day. And later on, when the shooting temporarily stopped, they tried to go home, but the troops found them and killed them. My other relatives are my uncle. My uncle's was in his house, was his son, Binyam, he's 17 years old, and his son-in-law, he's 25 years old. They was having breakfast as normal life. Every day they used to do, and the troops then entered to their house and said, you are Wajani, we came here to kill you. Sorry. And they killed 3 of the men, and they threatened the wife to not cry. They stopped them to crying and left to the neighbor house, searching for men house to house. Any men they could find, they kill on the neighbors. And it's very hard to hear from your family members being killed. I am deeply in pain and suffer. I haven't heard anything from my own mother for more than 8 months. I don't know if she's doing okay, if she's alive, if she's hungry, because of the duty of lack of access, humanitarian. It's just very hard. Thank you for listening for our pain and suffering. Next will be Fadila. Thank you.
Actually, did you want to share the pictures? I think we might have a slide for you.
Yes, please, Aaron. I forgot. Yeah, this is Lisana work, the first one. My uncle, he's 72 years old, and my nephew, 23. My other nephew, 27. And Gurmai Taklai is son-in-law of my uncle, and Binyam is my nephew. He's 17 years old.
Thank you, Ganet.
Thank you, Ganet. My name is Fadila Casa. I'm a Washington State resident, and I want to thank our representatives first and foremost for taking time out of your day to be here with us. It's very important, and I'm glad that you guys are accessible enough for us to do this. This war broke out on November 4th, and the most gut-wrenching part of the entire situation was the lack of communication. For a very long time, similar to Ganet's situation, we didn't know if our family was safe. I'm from Mekelle, the capital of Tigray, and I also have family in Shire. Reports started coming out of people dying and the not being able to contact our family and knowing if our family was safe, or like she said, if they were alive. Was really the most heart-wrenching part of it. A few weeks into the war, when connection was restored in Mekelle, we did eventually hear that our cousin was killed. Aaron, I think we have some slides. Thank you. His name was Nur Hussein. He was a very young, bright student. He was 27 years old and the heart of our family. Anything my grandparents needed, he was the first one to go run out the door to get for them. And that's why we were worried about him the most. Knowing that our family's lives were in jeopardy, our community, their neighborhood, we knew that he was the type to go out there and try to protect them. And that's what happened when Eritrean troops came to the local hospital and began looting the resources and destroying our infrastructure. Him and a group of other boys went out to defend the hospital from the attack, and he was shot dead in the street. They were able to get him up into the hospital and operated on him for about 6 hours, but unfortunately they couldn't save his life, and he passed away that night. We didn't hear that he had died until 2 weeks after they had already buried him. And I just remember getting the phone call from back home. It was like 4 a.m, and our entire lives were just torn apart. Having to talk to our family back home and reopen those wounds all over again was also very difficult. There really aren't enough words to describe the pain that our community is feeling. We have about five people here ready to give testimony, but the one thing I want to emphasize is that everybody in our community has either lost a family member or is waiting to hear back that they've lost a family member. The amount of destruction this war has caused is deep. It's widespread. Now that things have, we're especially worried about our family in Mekelle and Shire, but we also have family in Addis, which is the capital of Ethiopia. Initially, we weren't as concerned, thinking they would be safer there, but now that the Prosperity Party and Abiy Ahmed and his party and the Ethiopian troops that are cracking down on Tagaru citizens who live in all over Ethiopia, including Addis. We did find out 2 weeks ago that they arrested my cousin's brother, so my other cousin, the one who passed away's brother, was arrested and held for 3 days. We didn't know where he was at. And then finally, when he did return, his friends had to pay a fine to get him back. And he was just bloodied and bruised and had been attacked the entire time he was there. Every time we start to think that things might calm down and get better, it's just been getting worse. We are nearing a year into this war, and there's only so much our community can take. We're still in the midst of a global pandemic, and people are still suffering from our own grievances here in America. Throughout all of this, I did also have to experience the death of my father only 3 months ago due to COVID-19. And I promised I wouldn't get emotional, but this has been a very trying and long 9 months. So I really do hope that we can articulate that the best we can. Our community is hurt. It's everywhere. It's the global Tigrayan community that's just, it's a deep, deep pain. And I really do appreciate you guys coming and making the time to hear from us. And I really do hope that moving forward, we're going to experience some real change. Thank you again. And next up, I believe it will be Haragot.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, Haragot, we can hear you.
Okay. Hello, my name is Haragot Debriyesus. I'm a Washington State resident. First, I would like to say thank you for Congress representatives and the Gamai Zahalai for joining us and spending your precious time with us today. As we all know, the genocidal war in Tigray is still continuing. Hundreds of thousands of Tigrayans have been killed, tens of thousands have fled to Sudan, and millions are ethnically cleansed from Western Tigray, and other millions are in desperate need of food assistance. I am one of the many Tigrayan Americans who lost their beloved ones due to the ongoing war. On March 10, 2021, Eritrean and Ethiopian troops came to my parents' house and they indiscriminately killed my family. They killed 5 individuals from my family, including my father, Gidei Gabriyesus, a 72 years old priest, my nephew, Jonas Gidei, 21 years old, and 3 of my cousins, Agos Abraha, 29 years old, Toldol Aragai, 29 years old, and Warash Wald Aragai, 32 years old. More than 10 families from my relatives disappeared in Western Tigray, and we don't know if they are alive or not until now. For 9 months, Tigrayans are living in darkness. No electricity, no communications, no banks, and 8 corridors are blocked by Ethiopian and Amhara forces. I never talked to the rest of my family since March, and I don't know if they are alive or not. Since everything they had has been looted, burned, and eaten by Ethiopian and Eritrean forces, I'm not sure my family are in desperate need of assistance. But I feel depressed because I cannot help them at this difficult time. There is no any bank I can send them money or to get something to eat. So it's really difficult time for me. I feel heartbroken. Um, this is affecting my personal life. I cannot sleep. I cannot do my job effectively. I cannot stop thinking about my family. So I really hope you and your government will help us to deliver aid assistance to those in desperate need and to make the perpetrators accountable. Thank you.
Thank you, Haragot. Next, we have Gigi. Gigi, are you here with us?
Yep.
Okay.
So the reason I don't have my face up is separate homes back home or back in Ethiopia have had at least 2 that I know of random home searches. So the smallest risk is too big of a risk, but I am Washington resident. Getting to it, there have been numerous massacres committed in Tigray as reported by international outlets like Aksum, Dangalat Monastery, Maharadego, etc. Of the 78 missing in Maharadego massacre, 54 were identified whether by article of clothing, other personal artifacts, or ID cards. One of those killed was my cousin. Gabra Wahad was 33, a husband and father of 2 young children. He also cared for his ailing parents until their final days. He was shy, a humble person, an ideal son who stayed home to tend to his parents when the rest of his siblings went about their lives. He also had an infectious smile that could light up a room. Thinking of his death, I tried to find solace in that he might have died instantly, but the horrifying scenario is that he might have been alive when he was thrown over the cliff. And the fact that he leaves 2 children behind that have to grow up without their loving father and a provider. His brother had incurred beatings, harassments because he did not have a local ID. My father, tending to his own ailments at the time, tried to assist him in obtaining an ID card. In the process, my father became extremely sick, and as he was tending to his well-being, then learned of his nephew's death. My mother also fell ill near the same time as my father due to his illness and fear from daily heavy shellings in the region. And I do not know of their conditions due to the communication blackouts. My parents' home was also ransacked. Luckily, my parents were not home and ran to my brother's home just at the nick of time. My nephews, plural, had constantly to leave home before dawn and get home after dusk. And if it was not feasible to go home, they would spend days sheltered wherever they can, away from home. And I was able to confirm this when I was able to reach them, when communication was available, and I would ask of their whereabouts. My sister-in-law, who has a chronic health condition, at times renders her bedridden. But every time she hears of soldiers coming to their home, she musters the energy to get up and sit by the entrance to take orders of what soldiers wanted. Because if the soldiers deemed her to be hiding from them or insubordinate, this may lead to harsh outcomes for her and or her family. In all so far, I'm aware of 4 family members that we have lost. There are other family members whom I do not know of their whereabouts, including a young nephew. Thank you for your time. Next, I believe, is Kenneth.
Sorry, I just needed to unmute. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's very difficult to go after all the testimonies since the emotions, it's very tough, but please bear with me. Congressional Representative Smith, J. Paul, and Strickland, thank you very much for this opportunity and for you taking the time out of your busy schedules to listen to the testimonies and our plea to help our endangered families facing the genocide in Tigray, Ethiopia, this very moment. I reside in Seattle, Washington. Just as our leaders have met the needs of, design regional model for sustainable, vibrant communities with engaged citizens and accountable government in the United States, we Tigrayan American community members of Washington need your help to execute the same, globally. So the Ethiopian federal government has shown literally zero empathy to its citizens of Tigray, but instead it has celebrated, justified, mocks, and it denies the people of Tigray's destruction. Ethiopia has become hell on earth for our families. They have nowhere to go. Behind every one of the tens of thousands of civilians who've perished and who continue to perish, there's always a unique, heartbreaking story yet untold. Please know that it's been 9 months of bloodshed, 9 months of factory, church, mosque, school, and hospital destruction, 9 months of sorrow, displacement, and massacres, 9 months of extrajudicial killings, rapes, gang rapes of little girls such as young as age 4 by Ethiopian federal and Eritrean armed forces. It's been 9 months of no water, no food, and suspension of Tigrayan bank accounts, zero money to buy life-sustaining medication, food, healthcare needs, 9 months of starvation, and 9 months of blockage of any form of humanitarian access. It's been 9 months of ethnic cleansing, 9+ months of genocide on innocent people of Tigray. People of Tigray are enduring massive loss, endangerment of one's life, and extermination of entire communities. So villages, towns, cities alike are all claimed by these horrific atrocities of which the people of Tigray are terrified, traumatized, and numb with nowhere to run to, but await their final days. Globally, as Tigrayans, our inability to save our families from these horrific, barbaric armed forces has been crippling to us on every physical, psychological, and spiritual scale. Elected officials, we, your constituents, truly need your help to save the rest of our family members, friends, neighbors, and fellow countrymen, women, and children. The loss that Gannet and Haragot and Gigi have entailed are 3 of the many endless atrocities plaguing our home of origin in Tigray. We need you to save the lives of the rest of our families and bring back the livelihood Tigray once had prior to this genocidal war. Elected officials, please know that the trauma, anxiety, grief, depression, and agony that we, your constituents, suffer from as a result of these horrific war crimes is unimaginable. The unexpected deaths, starvation, sufferings, and pure turmoil of our family members and friends in Tigray leaves us in utter despair and has changed our lives and livelihoods entirely. We feel helpless, unable to assist our families in any way. We're unable to eat, sleep, work in our demanding jobs and think as we normally did prior to this war. It's terrible. Our entire families are there. It's only maybe just us or maybe our kids who are here with us. But the rest of our, multiple generations, they're all back home. So you can only imagine the pain that we feel. And I wish the rest of Ethiopia and the members, the leaders can really take that humanitarian feel to provide for our people and to save the people rather than killing them. So imagine your mother telling you that they have run out of food sources, including the little amount of flour they had to make bread, the moment you finally were able to get in contact with them after it's been 9 months right now, even after the proclaimed ceasefire, even though that's false. It's just we're disconnected again. So you don't know whether they're surviving, starving, anything. So just imagine that. So this very moment, all communications to Tigray have been blocked. We have zero access to speak to our families since the ceasefire, the so-called ceasefire. So our families' access to banks, food, water, healthcare, phone service, and internet access are none. And the central government of Ethiopia has plagued Tigray with unimaginable suffering, and we, thousands of miles away, are suffering. We are shattered and in complete heartbreak, seeking an end to this horrific war. Honorable elected officials, we know war destroys communities and families, and we're also aware that the effects of war include long-term physical and psychological harm to children and adults, just as it has affected people of Tigray globally. We Tigrayan Americans are suffering endlessly and need your help in every capacity immediately. We count on you, our representatives, to be our voice on the international scale. And we just thank you for being here and listening to our plea, but please just take action to help our families who are in immediate danger at this time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gannat. It's hard for everybody to keep telling these stories and keep hearing. Rivka?
Hi, my name is Rivka. I'm also a Washington State resident. I would appreciate you guys if you could give me a little grace, because even as much as you could prepare for something like this, when you hear your community members, have to repeat the trauma that they're experiencing here locally or the trauma of their family members going through this, it's a lot. So trying to gather your thought process is kind of hard, especially when you're on the spot, when you're doing something live. So I would appreciate that. Gannat tapped into it already a little bit, but I'm here to speak more on how it's affecting the Washington State citizens here in the US. It's a lot to imagine. I could have never imagined experiencing something like this, especially that I was there just so recently. My trip was cut short because of COVID-19, right? So for me, being a first generation, because I did have parents that had to leave to get a better life over here to help their family in Tigray, right? We have a different world when we're out here, we really are caught up in our privilege. So on November 4th, when this happened, you can only imagine how it was hard to really process like this being true, because there's certain media outlets that you're used to watching. There's also the privilege of not even paying attention of the different fires that are happening throughout the world that we have, being over here. So one, it was a lot of shock. It was a lot it still is, seeing your parents relive their trauma from even having to flee due to another conflict that Tigray has suffered in the past due to the Ethiopian government. Having your own trauma of, either never being able to meet 90% of your family, because either you're a refugee or you were first generation, and maybe you didn't have the privilege to be always to travel to Tigray to get to know your family. So it's a lot to unpack. It's a lot of pressure that's put on you to make sure that you're always saying the right thing, not forgetting to say something. Like, to imagine that we've been all of the Washington citizens thinking about the same thing for the last 9 months, today exactly being the 270 day. I had to write it down because I stopped counting, because it was getting very depressing to constantly hear how far we have gotten. We're 3/4 into a year of talking about people dying. It's a lot to process mentally for us. It's a lot of pressure to make sure you explain all the atrocities that have happened over the last 9 months. It's a lot of pressure to put yourself out here. I prefer not to speak publicly. I prefer to be behind the scenes. Public speaking is not what I do, but there is a need, so I joined on. A lot of people are challenging their own things that they struggle with because they have no choice but to advocate for their own people, because it's our family at the end of the day. It's our family that's fighting in TDF right now. So I can understand why it could be really hard to maybe advocate to a group of people that you don't identify with, because that's what we experience a lot here in America, just being a huge melting pot, right? It can seem kind of far if you don't know anyone that's from Tigray, or don't know anyone that's Habesha, or don't know anyone that's even from Africa, right? But like, if you view it in the way of your fellow neighbor, your coworker, people you have gotten to know here as a Washington State citizen, even though I'm Tigrayan, all I know is Washington, all I know is Seattle, right? So I would hope that the suffering and the pain of my family would be enough for you to want to do something. You know, it's a lot to process, to that it feels like it's only us speaking for us, especially people that you viewed as your, that was a part of the same country, supporting their political agenda over the innocent people that are dying. It's very hard to have hope. You know, mental health issues is very taboo in our community, let alone just in general. So you can imagine the different things that people are going through, the different things people are not speaking on. But you don't have a choice, because what is happening is so much bigger, because it's our whole entire families like dangling in front of our faces. Unfortunately, most of them have passed away. So I really hope that people really understand the mental state that everyone is in, not only here in Washington, but also in Tigray. And I hope they could see it in their hearts to want to do something. It was a wake-up call for me to realize that I was not speaking on a lot of different people's issues. Not issues, their suffering, just of the different things with all these different countries that we have surrounded us. And it was very hard to advocate for Tigray in the beginning, because I felt like a hypocrite. But I hope you can understand that it's, when you know better, you should try to do better. And it's okay that you haven't done that in the past. You can speak up for Tigray, and you can also speak up for another issue as well. You know, so here in Seattle, there are a few people that saw the need of, you know, spreading more awareness. So in addition to what Dr. Mulugeta will be saying, we do have a way that you guys can tap in locally to see what's happening. It's called the Seattle Tigray Network. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. So for anyone that's watching, if you just want to see what's happening, please follow us there. It emphasizes any efforts that are happening. So you as an ally, if you want to do something, send us the flyer, we'll promote it. Anyone in that community, same goes that way as well. We just need more people involved online and in person. We just also need you to start researching and doing your own research on Google, because we understand it's not based on just what we say, or doing more research on Tigray through Google, you know, try to understand what's happening so you are able to support the innocent people. Concerns are not enough anymore. The people of Tigray have been suffering for way too long. And the sooner the better, because they honestly cannot wait. 1 life, 10 lives should have been enough. We're in the hundreds of thousands of lives that are at least accounted for. Yeah, I'm gonna end it there. I appreciate your guys' time creating the platform for us.
Thank you, Ruka. Thank you, everyone, for your testimonies. We know it's hard. We keep having to tell these stories, and we're glad that we're getting some people to listen, and hopefully we can start to act too. Next, we have a couple of the solutions from our perspective, right? Because everyone has their own perspectives. And from our side, we feel like these are the immediate needs. And Professor Mugeta will be presenting those. Professor?
Yeah, good afternoon. The story of everyone that you have heard speaking is the story of mine too. I have an 80+ years old mom who lives in the mountains that you see in my background that I haven't heard from in a long time. So when Gannet was speaking about her parents, I was also weeping because that brings a lot of emotion. But I am going to not be emotional because I have decided to be a voice to the people of Tigray who are suffering tremendously for the last 9 months. My name is Mugeta Gabriel.
Professor, there's a background noise, and when you're talking, is that fixable or is that? If not,
not sure where it is coming from. Is it better now? I am a professor, and I work for a state university as well as the federal government or the VA. I am going to speak to some of the solutions that our community thinks could help immediately with some of the suffering. As you can see, the magnitude of the problem is so broad that maybe there is no one solution, but there are some things that you can help us with this in terms of resolving the conflict, in terms of resolving the humanitarian crisis, in terms of resolving even the problems that Rivka was defining. So I would really like to thank you for coming to listen to this group, to this community. We really appreciate your time and Mr. Zahalai for bringing us together. Slides, please. So how Congress can help address the humanitarian crisis in Tigray? Number one, independent investigation. As you have heard from everyone, there is a lot of humanitarian crisis, atrocities that have happened. So the US should pursue a credible, independent investigation of these atrocities that are committed in Tigray. Right now, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission is involved in that investigation, but it is actually an extension of the Ethiopian government, and hence it cannot conduct an impartial investigation. EHRC has already downplayed many of the crimes that you just heard from the community members, including the Aksum massacre, the Maikadra massacre. So we really think having an independent investigation could be a way to help end this situation. Next, please. The other important immediate solution we think is the US State Department has yet to release its classification of the war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. This process has started several months ago, and we believe that it is in the desk of the State Department. So we think that if you can help us push for the signing and release of the classification of war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity being perpetrated in Tigray, that could trigger some solutions to the problem, the ongoing problem, to the unfolding problem. Next slide, please. At the heart of what we are talking about today is humanitarian access. There is no humanitarian access really because Tigray is under siege. So we think that giving Tigray full humanitarian access could help as a way out. The US should help open a humanitarian corridor through Sudan to expedite humanitarian aid delivery and to save starving people. from famine. The reason we are saying this is because so far USAID has tried several ways to, and the same thing with WFP, the World Food Program, tried to deliver food to Tigray in several different ways, but because of what has happened with the siege, that has not become possible. So we are still, the Tigray people are suffering from famine, man-made famine. So I think humanitarian aid could be expedited by opening an alternative corridor through the Sudan. The other way to do this is like what the European Union suggested recently, which is an air bridge. And we would like the US to support this air bridge initiative by the European Union. Next, please. Solution number 4. So one of the key things that has been thought of is how to bring peace, because unless there is peace, unless there is stoppage of the conflicts, the war, maybe it's hard to attain all the solutions we are talking about. And last month, there was a unilateral ceasefire that was announced in Ethiopia. But despite that ceasefire, the situation continues to escalate. The reason for that, why the unilateral ceasefire is not working, is it's not a negotiated ceasefire. It is a ceasefire that is accompanied by a siege. That means all communication blocked, all roads blocked, all transportation to Tigray for aid or other purposes blocked. So with that, having a unilateral ceasefire is not going to do it. So what we ask the US should do is facilitate a true negotiated ceasefire, the exiting of all foreign troops from the region, including Eritrean, Ethiopian, as well as Amhara militia, and peace between the regional government of Tigray and the federal government of Ethiopia. So if the US government could help with this, we think that it could be a good solution to the unfolding humanitarian crisis. Next, please. Well, the three of you are respected, honorable representatives of the US Congress. And on the desk of the Congress, especially the House Foreign Relations Committee, is what we call this House Resolution 445, which was introduced on May 28, 2021 by Congresswoman Karen Bass, and co-sponsored by Chris Smith and also the two leaders of the House Foreign Relations Committee, Congressman Meeks and McCall. What we are asking you today is to sponsor and endorse this resolution, which is sitting with the House Committee on actually African Foreign Affairs, which is led by Congresswoman Karen Bass. This resolution, which is kind of mirrors the Senate Resolution 97, which passed almost 2 months ago, shouldn't be sitting, on the desk of the House Foreign Relations Committee. It needs to be marked up. It needs to be endorsed and approved so that it triggers some actions to resolve the humanitarian crisis that we are talking about. It is so unfair that this House Resolution 445, which asks for this humanitarian aid to flow, for the cessation of hostilities to happen, which are really the things we are asking today, is sitting on the desk of the House Foreign Relations Committee. So we appreciate really if you could help us with this ask. Next slide, please. Well, finally, I will really, again, thank you to help us with anything you can to stop this humanitarian crisis. As Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. Thank you so much.
Thank you to the community members who shared their vulnerability, their stories, and their solutions. I know how difficult that must have been to publicly share all of your emotions and your heart with all of us. Thank you. Understanding that this is a listening session, we will now give the members of Congress space to share any of their initial thoughts, or if there's anything at all that they would like to share with our communities in response to what they heard. I'll begin with Congressman Smith.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that information with us. And I think the dominant thought for all of us is if there's anything we can do to stop this suffering and save lives, we want to do it. And I think the testimony that was presented made it 100% clear just how horrific this is. And you're right, you know, I can't imagine. I mean, you think of your own family members, the people who are close to you, if all of a sudden you woke up the next day and they were all either had been killed or were in danger of it. Yeah, I can understand why no one, I mean, you just can't go about your life in that situation. It is literally an existential crisis in your life, and anything we can do to stop it, we want to try and do. And certainly I think the resolution that you mentioned, 445, certainly expresses the two overarching goals here. Stop the war and get humanitarian aid in. The problem is, from what I read, the war is continuing to escalate. Now the Tigray region has retaken the region from the Ethiopian forces, but the war is now spreading outside actually of Tigray as well, and that is further escalated it. And I guess the two big questions I have is, what's the path? When we go to Ethiopia, and I know Eritrea is involved in it as well, it seems like to a lesser extent at this point, but they were certainly involved in the atrocities that were being committed in Tigray. What's the path to getting Ethiopia and Tigray to agree to a ceasefire? Because that seems crucial to get the humanitarian aid in, because I hear you on opening a humanitarian access corridor to get a path, whether it's an air bridge or whatever it is, to get the humanitarian aid in. I've worked a lot on the conflict in Yemen, and this is always a challenge when there's fighting going on. How do you get the aid in? Because the combatants are not particularly interested in it. They're fighting, and certainly there's not a military solution here. I don't see the U.S. military or any outside military coming in and being helpful to try to basically force that corridor in place. That's not going to happen. Well, I shouldn't be so presumptuous. If there's a suggestion from you that you see where that could be helpful, I'd be anxious to hear it. But having a lot of experience in dealing with these conflicts, I don't see that as a solution. So basically, what's the path to get the ceasefire that would then give us the ability to get the humanitarian aid in place? I think we should state clearly the aspiration. I think we should call out the war crimes. We should have the investigations that you talk about. But the real path here is a ceasefire and getting humanitarian aid in, and any guidance you can give us on what we should say to our State Department about how they can push that is really what I need to be helpful.
Yeah, I can try to give a little answer. I think, like you said, my background is in conflict resolution. I went to George Mason in Virginia and have been in several different countries that have been conflict hit. And it's really a difficult situation. From the Tigray TDF side, they have created a 7-point pre-negotiation terms to basically all of the asks of humanitarian aid and investigation and all of that. I think I feel like a lot of them are waiting for the Ethiopian government to give us their preconditions for negotiations, because we still don't know what their desires are. We don't know what their plans are. And
if I could, just the origin of the conflict basically was, Ethiopia had, well, as all nations do, they have different regions, that there was a complex power sharing arrangement and how the government was functioning, and the new Ethiopian government basically violated that power sharing arrangement, where they couldn't get to an agreement with Tigray at any rate. And Tigray basically then broke off, and the Ethiopian government went in with apparently the assistance of Eritrea to force them back into the government. And that's where all the war crimes were consisted. Is there any effort to try to negotiate on that central question of how can the governance questions be resolved?
It's difficult with that. I mean, I think we can probably set up a different meeting just internally to understand the dynamics, all of that, and Eritrea's involvement and their feelings and relationships, because at one point, part of Eritrea and Tigray were all the same. That is, and during the monarchies and things back in the day. And when, and also there's, we have kingdoms back in the day, right? There was kingdoms of the north and the south and the west. And they always fought each other for the kings of kings position, which was the last king of Haile Selassie, right? And so because the North has been always the dominant place, because it's the Ark of the Covenant, it's all of the historical history of Black civilization really is from that specific leadership. And so there has been a lot of wanting or needing from external forces to break up that region. So during the last, before the king got killed and all of that, that was split. So half of Tigray from the Tigray, that's why Eritreans and Tigray speak Tigrinya. We both speak the same language. And so the Eritreans, they ended up breaking off when they created that EPDR, the collective of organizations. And there was a grievance from Isaias, it's my understanding, that he wanted to be the leader of all of Ethiopia, kind of like how Abiy wants to be the leader of all of Ethiopia. And so that whole relationship, and so for me, I think it's important to find peace, because I identify as an Ethiopian American. I never lived in Tigray. I mean, I did pre-COVID, I was doing projects there with women, but I identify as Ethiopian. I love all parts of Ethiopia. I had farms in the southern region. I grew up in Addis, and so I think it's helpful to, there's been also a lot of propaganda from over the last 30 years of what Ethiopian government is really like. And so I think that whole idea of who Tigray and Tigray leadership is kind of polluted the way we see it. And I think that's why it took so long for anybody to start believing us and hearing us when we were talking about those atrocities. I mean, I've offered my personal help to the Embassy of Ethiopia. I've had meetings with all of the ambassadors, and even for the investigation, I suggested, if you want to do it, add people from Tigray to do it. So I think from the Tigray side, I don't know because I don't represent the government, but I feel like there is a willingness to sit down and talk. But I guess the question you're asking, Congressman, is a good question. We don't know what the intentions of the Ethiopian government is at this point, outside of eliminating our leaders and our elders and our family members. So I think it's to understand what they want. We need to be talking to them. And also I think it needs directly, the US government needs to talk to the Tigray leadership, because now they're called rebels. These are not rebels. These were elected officials. And from our constitution, Ethiopian constitution, over the last 30 years, they're the ones who did the election as it was supposed to be. Imagine if the insurrection that happened in January, I'm sorry for you guys having to deal with that. That's what we're dealing with right now in Ethiopia. That is, imagine if they had won and Trump was still is the president. And then Washington went to war. We don't want to be a part of that. That's kind of what's happening right now. So we have to talk to Trump.
Understood. I want to let my other colleagues say, is there anyone trying right now? Is there any, a lot of times in cases like this, what country could we work with? Is the African Union involved? If we go to the State Department and say, hey, with who should we be working with?
Kenya, the permanent members of the UN, which is Kenya, Niger, and Tunisia. Those are the people, the 3 African governments that can help us move this forward. The African Union depends on the stability of Ethiopia and has not been wanting, understandably, it's so complicated, all of this stuff. But the 3 African countries, I would suggest are those 3.
Thank you.
Can I actually give me a couple of minutes to elaborate on a couple of points that the Knight raised? So Kenya and the 2 other African countries that are members of the Security Council have actually been obstacles to the US-led effort to bring a solution through the UN Security Council. So I would like you to recognize that when the Knight suggests the names of these African countries. We believe that there are solutions to African problems, but right now really the solution from Africa for African problems doesn't seem to be happening because the African Union from the outset took sides with the Abiy government. So that was really a huge problem. So to answer your question, Congressman Smith, I think right now there are some efforts where conditions are put out by the Tigray government, but the response from the Ethiopian government, as you have heard from the president of the Amhara region, is, well, let's do more war. Let's go and fight them. So that is why the war is moving from the Tigray area to the Afar and the Amhara region, because with the peace deal that is put out by the Tigray government, there is no really direct response, at least that we are aware of right now, that is trying to move the peace talks forward. I am hearing that the State Department might be taking a step around that. That's why maybe there are some negotiations with the Ethiopian opposition. But the challenge that we will be facing, whoever is doing this, is most of the opposition party leaders, even from the Oromia region and from the other regions, are in jail, like Bakala Garba, like Jawar Mohammed, and others who represent the, the Oromia region are in jail. So that is creating a huge problem. So the release of all prisoners is one of the conditions that is put out in the Tigray government, 7-point, negotiation points that they have released. I think that is important. And they have also asked for the war to stop, like this hostility from the federal government and the Eritrean government, because the Eritrean government still occupies the western part of Tigray, some parts of the western parts of Tigray. The same thing, the Amhara forces still occupy parts of western Tigray. So unless that happens, it becomes so difficult for this hostility to move into the rest of Ethiopia. So to me, it looks like that if the US could do and bring its allies, I mean, the European Union as well as the United Nations, to kind of bring these people to the negotiating table and ask them to stop the hostilities, I believe that could be a way forward. And there are Tigrayan diaspora organizations here that could also play a role. There are civic organizations that could play a role, and we can facilitate that in terms of bringing them to the table if they can be of any help. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for those questions, Congressman Smith. Next up, we call on Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal.
Thank you so much, Gurmai, and thank you to everybody who spoke today. I have been really moved by everything you've said. I myself am a first-generation immigrant, and I really resonated with many of the things that Ripka was saying about the complexities of our relationships with the United States as Indian Americans, as Tigrayan Americans, and also with our home country. And I think it is incumbent on all of us to point out human rights abuses, no matter where we are, whether it's here in the United States or whether it's in our birth countries or our countries of origin. The stories that you shared were heartbreaking. I just want to recognize the pain that I heard so that you know that it was heard and felt. And also to say, having my parents in India as well, and often wondering and worrying when I can't get through, and there's a different kind of situation in India. It's not war, but there are many challenges there as well. And I just want to say thank you so much for sharing the personal stories, because for me, as an activist and an advocate, it is that voice that makes the biggest difference. It is that voice that allows us to really think about acting. And I also just wanted to recognize, I think it was Danait in the beginning, when you talked about the consequences of war on women and children. 20 years ago, I wrote a petition that went viral as an activist about the war. At that time, it was the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. and the consequences of war, particularly on women and children, and also the strength of women. Several people spoke about Sudan. I had the opportunity to be in Sudan last January with Karen Bass. And, you know, just really seeing the role of women and nonviolent resistance and all the sacrifices. I just wanted to make a particular mention of that. I will be signing on to the resolution, Karen Bass's resolution, and I was texting with her this morning in preparation for this session. She has told me that they will be marking up the resolution when we get back in September. So I hope that is of some consolation to you. They will be marking up that resolution in committee in September. And I'd like to ask if you have edits to that resolution, if you have things that should be in there that aren't in there, this would be the opportunity to give that feedback to me. And I'm happy to pass that along to Representative Bass. She said she would be happy to receive that and look at your suggestions for that resolution. I think the other thing I was thinking is, you know, you probably know the actions that the U.S. has already taken. I do think that there is evidence that the United States is taking this seriously, sending Senator Coons to Ethiopia. Obviously, Secretary Blinken has taken it seriously. I think it was July 6th that he spoke most recently about this, including, you know, stressing the need for parties to the conflict to commit to an immediate, indefinite, negotiated ceasefire. To your point about your solutions, that was one of them, the negotiated ceasefire. I think that is very clearly on the Secretary's docket or plate, as it is. And then, of course, the humanitarian aid, which we all are very, very concerned with, and the humanitarian access corridor. You know, the United States has a little bit less leverage here than we do in a place like Yemen. And I was actually just on the phone yesterday with Secretary Blinken about his recent trip to India and also about Yemen, because I've been working very hard as the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus on the humanitarian access in Yemen. So I know that that is of tremendous concern, probably one of our top concerns, and that would be in part what the resolution is designed to sort of push for, is to give the sense of Congress that this is a critical issue for us to ensure humanitarian access. And I think that one of the most important things to me is to acknowledge what is going on in the region and to acknowledge the acts of ethnic cleansing, of genocide. They are happening, and anybody who says they're not happening is not credible in my view. And so I think that is extremely important. I was pleased to see that Secretary Blinken himself referred to this as acts of ethnic cleansing in Tigray. I think that's an important statement coming from our Secretary of State. And so I have learned a lot from all of you, most importantly, how strong our community is. And I just want you to know, as an immigrant who started my career, I think it was Ripka who was saying, well, maybe we can't completely understand because we're not Tigrayan. And I would just say that my whole life, I feel like I've spent advocating for people right after 9/11, when I was advocating for Muslim Americans and Sikh Americans and Arab Americans. And people said, are you Muslim American? No. Are you Arab American? No. Are you Sikh American? No. But you know what? The heart for human rights and the passion for human rights is strong across all of us. So I am going to take this back. I think it may be worthwhile to have Karen, she said she'd be happy to do this for us, Adam and Marilyn, to just sit down with us and give us her update on where things are. And then perhaps we could even ask for a briefing from state, just to, again, see exactly where state is and to add our voices to those that are already there. So I hope the fact that the resolution is going to move forward is one possible way to really draw attention to this. And I'm going to be very proud to sign on to that resolution. So thank you so much for your testimony, but also for continuing to advocate and for understanding that every one of us, regardless of where we came from, live in a country that believes in and promotes human rights. And that has to be at the core of everything we do. And I commit to you that will be at the core of everything that I advocate for. So thank you so much.
Wow, thank you so much, Congresswoman Jayapal. That means a lot. And I know Professor Mulugeta does have some amendment proposals that he will send you over email. Is that right, Professor?
Yes, I am also really very happy that you are going to take those steps, meeting with, Karen Bass as well as the State Department on the couple of solutions that we propose. But we have also amendments that we have studied, the House Resolution 445. And I will follow up. We'll follow up with email. Thank you so much.
Yeah, if you could send those to my office, we will take a look at them ourselves and we'll discuss them with Karen and see what is possible in time for the markup. So yes, please do send them along and I'll be very happy to receive them.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say quickly too, growing up in Addis, I went to an Indian school. So I actually know your national anthem, Jana Mana Ana.
That's wonderful. Well, we share a lot, and throughout my career as an immigrant rights activist, and actually all of my work in the Horn of Africa, a lot of people don't know, but I worked across West Africa and East Africa for 10 years doing international health and development work before I started One America. So. There are a lot of words and a lot of spices that we share. So
that's true. And we also do have a lot of Yemeni refugees in Addis. When I was there, they were on the streets begging along with the Ethiopians, and it was really heartbreaking. So we are interconnected in more ways than we understand.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Jayapal. Next up, we have the incredible former mayor and newest member of the Congress, Marilyn Strickland. Thank you so much for being here, Congresswoman Strickland.
All right, well, first I want to say thank you to everyone who shared their personal stories. I think sometimes when we live in the United States, even those of us who were born abroad, when we hear about these things, they seem so removed. And then we sometimes forget that there are people right here who are neighbors, who are among us, who are living through these tragedies and this heartache. And I just want to thank you for the courage to share your stories publicly. I know how hard that is. It's emotional, it's difficult, but I think it's very important for us to put names and faces of people right here in our communities with the tragedies that are happening, across the world. I tend to be very practical, and I think about, okay, what specifically can we actually do? And, I think the same questions that Congressman Smith was asking about, what are some of the actions we can take? I know that the administrator of USAID, Samantha Power, is actually in Sudan and Ethiopia right now talking about how we can get aid to people and what some of the barriers are to getting humanitarian aid to people. And I think one question I have, when I think about something like this, are there other people who are Tigrayan who are in other parts of the United States? What are we doing from a national standpoint to build up advocacy for those of us in Washington state, but other states across the country? That's my first question. And then my second question is, what is the international community doing about this? Do we have allies from different countries around the world? The EU, I talked about the AU, but what are we doing to really build momentum so that this issue gets amplified and that people are willing to put resources in to try to address this humanitarian crisis? And as you know, it means they destroy infrastructure, communication infrastructure, the ability to get food, the ability to to move around through transportation. What are we doing to address those things? So more than a comment and expressing my my affinity with you, I just want to hear practically what's going on as far as building up momentum both nationally and around the world.
And I can start too, and if anybody else can jump in. I think for the first question in terms of, and actually it goes for both. Over the last 9 months, about 40 plus nonprofits have sprung out internationally. All young people, younger than me, 20-year-old kids have built all these organizations across the globe. And I think, and a lot of the times we've been talking with our local representatives, and we do have asks, like Rivka talked about it really well. we're mentally drained. We all have demanding jobs. We're engineers, we're program managers, we're council people, you know? And so we've definitely asked for some mental health support, as well as, but sorry, it's a lot that we could do, and we can talk about it in many ways. But I think another, Ireland is a good ally, has been advocating for us, and a good country. I think that goes for your question last time, Congressman. Has been a country, and I got in text like Ireland. I'm like, yeah. So those have been an ally. Professor, if you want to jump in.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Congresswoman Strickland. Yeah, congratulations, to your election too. So really, both of your questions are really very relevant. On the first one, actually there is a huge civic organization movement, like the Knight was mentioning, that has sprung up, not only actually over the 9 months, even though it is now focused on the war on Tigray, but throughout, for instance, I am a board member of several organizations that have been doing global health Tigray in Ethiopia over the years since 2010. And there are civic organizations like right now that are really heavily focused only on advocacy and diplomacy, that are meeting with Congress people, with senators, with the UN. So we will be happy to talk with to speak with your office and bring some of the information and the advocacy work that you have been doing over the last 9 months. The dashboard that you have seen is, part of the umbrella work that has been going on throughout the international coalition of Tigrayans who are trying to influence policy, as well as the intervention, especially in terms of humanitarian aid. On your second question, with regard to really, almost everyone has been sympathetic to the cause of Tigray, except really a couple of powerful countries in the UN Security Council. Maybe you have heard, Ambassador Linda Greenfield in the last first open UN Security Council meeting. She actually said this. I don't know if you have heard her say this, but it was her Zoom was muted and she couldn't unmute it. And after they unmuted, she said, "Well, we have been muted for the last 7 months to speak on Tigray officially and publicly, because there are countries in that UN Security Council that have been saying no, and still saying no for any UN Security Council action." So really, you can see that out of the 16 members right now, more than 10 of them actually are supporting, but are 2 or 3 countries. Unfortunately, I don't know for that. There is no any reason I can, kind of think about that would make them withhold this push to resolve the crisis, the push to bring aid and humanitarian corridor to the people of Tigray, to stop this genocidal war. So I think there is international coalition around this, but you know how the UN Security Council works. There are 2 or 3 countries that are saying no. So I think that answers your question. I hope. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you again for sharing your stories. With me, and for for answering my question as well.
And could I just comment quickly on the last point? I think it's why it's so important, as both Pramila and Marilyn said, the U.S. get engaged here. Look, China and Russia, they don't care about human rights. I mean, the reason that they're blocking this is they want to keep up a good relationship with the Ethiopian government, primarily for access to minerals, which are, I've done a lot of work in the Eastern DRC, and that's, part of the problem is any effort to come in there and, deal with the humanitarian crisis runs into the cold calculation of primarily China simply trying to exploit the resources. And China's big international pitch is, hey, we're not going to hassle you about how you run your country. We're just here to do business. And I think it's why it's incredibly important that the U.S. maintain a leadership role. And we are not perfect. I am abundantly aware of that. But at least it is part of how we approach these issues to try to address humanitarian crisis, not to just come in and try to exploit what's there. And I think we need to continue to push on our State Department to do that.
Thank you all so much for that. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in to this Congress and Community Roundtable. As you heard, the situation is truly heartbreaking and requires everyone to do their part to bring peace and stability to Ethiopia and in the entire region. Thank you to the community members who, again, shared their vulnerability, their stories, and their solutions. I can't imagine how difficult it must have been, especially for those of you who were moved to tears during this conversation. Thank you so much to our members of Congress for making time to listen and learn, especially during a time when you have so many crises to manage. It feels like every week something new and unprecedented is happening. So for you all to come together and make time and engage your community in such a grassroots and transparent way means everything. And I actually think it's a model for how we can listen to more of our community members around the country who are struggling with this and struggling to find a voice and a platform to express what's going on with them and their family members. So we can't thank you enough for doing that and for asking thoughtful questions and being willing to engage moving forward as well. For those of you who are watching and want to plug in, learn more, and support, please review the earlier portions of this video for the part where Ribka shared some of the local resources where you can learn more about what's going on locally. Thank you to my team members, Aaron, Rhonda, and Dan, for managing the comments section of this and for helping us get this video up and running and for all the planning that went into this. Have a great weekend, everyone. Please stay safe and please stay engaged. Let's protect all of the innocent lives around the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Gurmai.
Thank you. And thank you for that quick action we just heard already. So we like that.
See you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Gurmai, Council Member Gurmai Zahalai, and everybody. Sanait, Dr. Mulgeta, Rubka, Fadila, Haragot, and all of you that you gave testimony today. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Our Cyber Power of Tigray Media has ended here. Bye.